They're just constantly on us. TV, radio, the mail, on our phones, texting. Hey, Bill, Tim Walz here. You up? They're everywhere all the time. Jesus Christ, fuck off. Let mommy put her purse down. And what I could see is replacing the vice president because, yeah, she's just not very popular anywhere. And it didn't seem to work out. And I don't know, that's been done before on a ticket. I just think she's a bad politician.
The Democrats are scrambling to find anyone who can take control of their struggling campaign as they inch toward re-election. And guess who's suddenly back in the spotlight? Kamala Harris. Because nothing says new leadership like bringing back one of the least charismatic vice presidents in recent memory. If you've ever watched Bill Maher for more than a few minutes, you know he's never been much of a Kamala supporter in that. Hasn't changed one bit, got in a fiery monologue. Maher didn't just shut down the idea of Kamala 2024. He practically soaked it in gasoline and set it ablaze. So, yeah. You might want to grab your popcorn and maybe even a fire extinguisher.
Biden was still hanging on to be the candidate. Many of the pundits said that to switch him out this late would cause chaos. Yeah, that was never my position. And indeed, what happened was Kamala Harris said, oh, look, I guess it's my turn. And the next day, a grateful nation handed her $500 million. The only reason we stay stuck in permanent campaign mode is money. It's estimated this year that $16 billion will be spent on political ads. It's time we admit that the endless campaign exists only to enrich advertisers, political consultants, and what's left of the news media.
Maher began his rant by pointing out that it took Joe Biden years, not weeks or months, but years to finally admit what many had already noticed with their own eyes, that he no longer had the mental sharpness to run for re-election. And not many of us dared to say it out loud. We were quickly silenced, smeared, or buried under so-called fact checks. But when Biden collapsed during the presidential debate, those once dismissed concerns suddenly became commonsense.nd. How did the Democrats respond? Did they unite behind a strong, energetic candidate? Of course not. They passed the baton to Kamala Harris, the vice president. So absent during her time in office that you'd be forgiven for thinking she was in witness protection. She faced no real competition, no resistance. And what did that deliver? One of the most humiliating electoral defeats in American political history.
People didn't used to get sick of the candidates because you barely ever saw them unless you happened to be standing at the back end of a train. But now we never stop seeing them. The winner in modern elections comes down to who we're less tired of. They're just constantly on us. TV, radio, the mail, on our phones, texting. Hey, Bill, Tim Walz here. You up? They're everywhere all the time. Jesus Christ, fuck off. Let mommy put her purse down.
One of the lighter reasons Maher believes Kamala Harris sank the election is that people were simply exhausted from seeing her face everywhere and not in a strong presidential way, but in a painfully forced PR blitz that felt more like spam than leadership. With her and Tim Walz showing up so often, they felt like unwanted pop-ups appearing in inboxes, on TV screens, crashing concerts, sneaking into Instagram reels, interrupting YouTube videos, and flooding TikTok feeds. It was a non-stop saturation campaign that didn't build trust, but instead wore people down, creating a sense of suffocation and fatigue. And for many, including Maher, it felt like being trapped in a terrible ad campaign that refused to end, pushing a historically unpopular vice president with no clear direction, and even less authenticity rather than building any real connection with voters. The whole effort came across as desperate, tone-deaf, and deeply disconnected, or as Maher put it, not just overexposure, but political self-sabotage in stunning high definition.
What I could see is replacing the vice president because, yeah, she's just not very popular anywhere. And it didn't seem to work out. And I don't know, that's been done before on a ticket. I just think she's a bad politician.
Another reason Maher believes Kamala Harris is bound to fail as a candidate is that she's simply not a good politician. And not in the charming outsider or rebellious rogue sense either, because while we could list plenty of political missteps, one major flaw stands out. Her struggle to handle unscripted questions. The moment she's asked something beyond her rehearsed talking points. It's like watching a deer in the headlights. If that deer also suffered a teleprompter glitch, and by now, we've all seen the infamous word salads, those long, rambling, and disjointed responses that somehow manage to say absolutely nothing while dragging on for far too long.
Need to get to go and need to be able to get where you need to go.
I do believe that we should have rightly believed, but we certainly believe that certain issues are just settled. And that's why I do believe that we are living in real unsettled times.
Even her scripted interviews are difficult to watch, as she stumbles, backtracks, and often gives answers that leave voters more puzzled than informed doubt. And for someone who has spent years in public office, her communication skills come off surprisingly unrefined. Because in politics, clarity and confidence are essential, yet Kamala repeatedly falls short on both. And Maher isn't being dramatic, he's simply pointing out what's plain to see, like that unforgettable moment when she mistakenly referred to North Korea as one of America's allies. Number.
The United States shares a very important relationship, which is an alliance with the Republic of North Korea. In the North, we see a brutal dictatorship, rampant human rights violations, and an unlawful weapons program.
I mean, seriously, how does someone accidentally call North Korea an ally? That's not just a minor slip. That's a full-scale geopolitical faceplant, and sure, we might laugh it off as a harmless gaffe if it came from someone else. But let's be real. This is Kamala Harris we're talking about. The same person who's practically made a career out of clumsy speeches and awkward public missteps. And at this point, she's not just prone to gaffes. She's the undisputed queen of them. Now imagine her as president, sitting in a high-stakes closed-door meeting with world leaders. Maybe a G7 summit. Or a negotiation with China or Russia, and she casually drops another bizarre, confusing comment like that. The room would freeze. Translators would scramble, and global markets might actually tremble. Because these aren't silly word games, they're serious errors, with real-world consequences. And when the role demands razor-sharp communication and a deep grasp of global affairs, the last thing the country needs is a leader who can't stop tripping over her own words. And in that sense, Maher wasn't just making a point, he was making a prediction.
This is Kamala's great dilemma. Trump is invulnerable to an October surprise, but she is very vulnerable because she's the one who is still undefined. And as she showed in this week's Bret Baier interview, her go-to when attacked for her own actions is usually Trump is worse. Okay, we know that. But now undecided voters want to hear about you. They want someone to vote for. This election comes down to this. Trump has a coalition of voters made up of A, people who really do like him, and B, people who think with all of his flaws, he's still better than far-left insanity.
Harris was so weak on the campaign trail that every time she got backed into a corner, she'd resort to the same worn-out fallback. Well, Trump was worse. As if simply not being Trump was enough to qualify her for the presidency, which, let's be honest, isn't a strategy at all. It's just a lazy excuse. And according to Maher, one of the real tests for Harris was whether she had the backbone to stand up to the increasingly extreme demands of the woke crowd. And the big question was, would she lead with independent judgment or buckle under pressure from the loudest activists in the room? Unfortunately, the answer was clear. She folded like a lawn chair, repeatedly showing she lacked the strength to challenge radical narratives. And instead of leading with conviction, she echoed whatever slogan happened to be trending that week. For Maher and a growing number of frustrated voters, that wasn't just a red flag guy, it was solid evidence that she wasn't prepared to lead a deeply divided nation that's craving direction, not blind conformity.
There's big doubt about Kamala is, are you part of far-left insanity? The attack ad I see 10 times a day and a question Bret Baier aimed at her on Wednesday was about her saying in 2019 that she supported providing taxpayer-funded sex change operations to illegal immigrants in prison. Something that's actually never happened and has no real bearing on anybody's life. But it's a litmus test for voters out there who want to know of the Democrat, is there anything your fringe can suggest that will ever make you say, no, that's fucking ridiculous? It's getting late early, and we can't And we can't afford any more bad answers like this one last week.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
No bueno.
And this was the breaking point for most voters, because after 4 years of increasingly draining woke politics under President Biden, the American people had one pressing question. Would Kamala Harris follow the same path or take it even further? And sadly, Harris offered no comfort, no vision, and no sign that she'd pull back. If anything, her silence, or worse, her quiet approval, suggested she might actually double down on the same divisive, performative policies that had already driven away a significant portion of the electorate. And at a time when voters were craving strength, common sense, and a return to normalcy, what they got from Harris was vagueness wrapped in activist buzzwords. So when the moment of decision came, the public turned toward the one candidate who addressed that growing need for restoration, President Trump. And whether people loved him or hated him, he represented something Harris couldn't offer: hope for economic strength, law and order, energy independence, and the kind of bold, unfiltered leadership that doesn't back down under pressure. Because for many Americans, Trump wasn't just another candidate. He was the correction they believed the country desperately needed.
This time, maybe try. Joe Biden generally did a good job, but sure, I wish we'd tightened the border sooner, as we have done now. And trust me, I learned my lesson, and that's never going to happen again. Kamala, it's so important that you win this election, not just for the sake of retaining a real democracy and for the good of the world, but also because I predicted a month ago you'd win this thing, and if you blow it, it's going to make me look bad.
One of the major reasons Maher believes Kamala Harris is unfit for the presidency is her disastrous handling of the border crisis. Because when she was appointed as the so-called border czar, it was one of the most prominent assignments of her career, and yet she completely failed to deliver. Under her watch, the southern border didn't just develop cracks, it utterly collapsed. Millions of illegal immigrants poured into the country, bringing chaos, overwhelmed local communities, and serious national security threats. And it wasn't just about the overwhelming numbers, because according to Maher and many others, this wasn't simply about struggling, families seeking opportunity. The border had effectively become a super highway for trafficking human, drug, and weapons alike, with dangerous substances like fentanyl flooding into American cities and pushing overdose deaths to alarming highs. Illegal. Weapons flowing into criminal networks. And law enforcement struggling to manage the fallout. And through all of it, where was Harris? Largely invisible, offering vague statements and avoiding the very crisis she was assigned to resolve. And if this was meant to be a test of leadership, she didn't just fail. She didn't even bother to show up.
I've got a really good prediction record, so please don't fuck this up. Kamala, ever since I put down my marker on you and said you'd win and I wasn't even worried about it, everyone, everywhere, on the road, in LA, texting me, emailing me, stopping me in restaurants, asking me, Bill, are you sure? No, I'm not fucking sure. What am I, Kreskin? I'm not sure, but that's my gut. I think Kamala Harris wants this. I think she can do this, to say nothing of, if she loses, she'll never hear the end of it from Joe. I told you I was the only one who could beat him by...
Maher's prediction couldn't stop what was coming. It turned out to be exactly right. Kamala Harris lost the election, and not by a narrow margin, but in a landslide as voters decisively rejected her. And yet, even in defeat, Maher's criticisms remain just as relevant today, because Kamala hasn't evolved, adjusted, or shown any effort to change course. NSTEAD. She's doubling down on the same habits and flaws that made her unelectable in the first place. And just to prove the point, she was recently invited to speak at a major real estate conference. A perfect chance to offer real ideas and show some leadership. But instead, she delivered yet another one of her trademark word salads, rambling. Unclear and so vague that the audience was left scratching their heads, wondering if she'd actually said anything at all, because there was no substance, no focus. Just another painful display of political nonsense, and if Harris truly sees herself as a serious future contender, she might want to start by mastering the art of completing a sentence. But until then, Maher's takedown remains a harsh yet honest reality check.